As someone who really likes horror things conceptually, but is a bit of a fraidy cat in practice, I spend a lot of time thinking about the nature of fear. At the 2014 Tribeca Film Festival, I saw a movie called Honeymoon that I never reviewed, but have thought about at least once a month ever since, and so I definitely bring it up in conversation more than is necessary. But it was a milestone movie for me in that it helped clarify something about what I find scary. Because halfway through the movie, the apparent monster changes, and we realize that this isn't human horror, but something supernatural. And like a switch, the dread that I had felt was gone. So it makes sense that I would think the 2017 adaptation of Stephen King's It, which was ultimately revealed to just be the first half of a flawlessly casted epic, is scariest when Bill Skarsgård is doing his regular Pennywise the Dancing Clown thing, and not when he's taking on some grotesquely CGI'd form set to the loudest sounds you can possibly imagine. When I first saw it, I found it fairly anxiety-producing because I absolutely hate jump scares, and that's really its MO. The movie is littered with big movement plus noise combinations that make me jump, if not necessarily feel any quote-unquote fear. But I liked it quite a bit, and so have been looking forward to the sequel ever since. When I first heard that it was nearly 3 hours long, I became a bit concerned about the prospect of a prolonged anxiety attack as I anticipated jump after jump after jump in an IMAX theater, but the trailers made me a little hopeful that things might be different this time around, and specifically that it would focus more on being actually creepy than entirely jumpy. Although, Pennywise's lick-a-tongue look made it seem more silly than anything. And I think I was wrong, but not in the way I expected. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week I Review. You can call me a guy whose second best middle school memory involved having the story of misery retold to him in a candlelit room. And today, I am talking about It Chapter 2. My experience with Stephen King's 1986 novel is fairly limited. I remember being told I would float too. I remember some general homophobia. I remember being on page 100, and I remember realizing that at that point, I wasn't even a tenth of the way through this, and I am a suburban New England child who doesn't really need to be reading about a clown eating suburban New England children. And also, I have a Nintendo 64 now, and I'm gonna go play the copy of Perfect Dark that I borrowed from a neighbor whose name I no longer remember. As a result, all of the things I feel I know about the book come secondhand from the many, many takes, hot or otherwise, I have read in the past couple of years. And it's pretty clear that the book is super weird, whether because of the Losers Club having sex when they're very young, or the fact that it is only beaten with the help of a giant turtle. It's just a lot, you know? And as a result, this second installment is much stranger than the first. It Chapter 1 was pretty straightforward as far as these things go. People see spooky stuff that's specific to them, and then they may or may not see a clown that may or may not scare them by virtue of being a clown. You know, horror. There were plenty of things that are off, but the only genuinely what thing was Pennywise dancing at the end, though admittedly that was very, very what? Chapter 2, on the other hand, must confront Pennywise's origins, which are extraterrestrial in nature, and it also invokes the name rather than just the idea of the ritual of Chud, which is a psychological battle of wills that reminds me a lot of that ritual from Dragon Ball where they put an evil spirit into a jar thing that, in this case, was stolen from a group of Native Americans who exist only to impart mystic knowledge. Which isn't great. Stephen King sure does love his magical non-white folks, huh? This actually points to something particularly odd about this adaptation. Its change of period. It Chapter 2 opens with a hate crime against a gay male couple. And I understand that being openly gay is still not accepted everywhere and that people definitely are attacked for being themselves. But that really just doesn't feel like a particularly timely bit of ultraviolence. It feels much more like something from the 1980s, which makes sense when you remember that that's when this story is from. The novel and the 1990 miniseries adaptation are set in the 50s and 80s for the kids and adults, respectively. It 2017 was set in the 80s, and It 2019 is set in both the 80s and 2010s. I thought that the shift in time would matter, that maybe, they would try to think about what it would mean to have Pennywise the Clown in the age of the internet. That was actually part of why I was excited to see it. But they didn't do that, or really anything that might bring this story 30 years in the future. Folks use their cell phones instead of landlines, but they only ever call each other in places where a landline would be available. The internet may as well not exist. Heck, there are several sequences with young children, and they do not once pull out their phones, even when they see someone they know is famous. What? This movie feels older than it is. If it weren't for the cast and the reliance on CGI, the fact that they digitally de-aged some of the kids is genuinely fascinating to me, and something I felt like I could see sometimes, but was definitely invisible others. This movie could have been made 10 or 20 years ago, and wouldn't have noticed. As the kind of person who complains when something is set in a different era just because nostalgia or whatever, I'm actually kind of conflicted about this. We don't need any more 80s nostalgia trips. But it's not like we don't get that already from the youths in this and the previous movie. So it's a question of whether the kids should be in the 50s or the 80s. And I don't know, if they aren't going to update the content, why update its context? This isn't Shakespeare. Good horror speaks to society's fears. It, Chapter 2, does not speak to 2019's fears, or 2016's for that matter. And partially as a result of that, it's just not scary. Bill Skarsgård continues to be thoroughly unsettling as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, but are clowns even still a thing? And I say this as someone who lived with a clown for 2 years, though she's like a clown in the performative sense and not the fashionable one. To thoroughly investigate this, I took advantage of the fact that YouTube decided my Dance Gavin Dance review was worth showing to people for one blissful week during my anniversary celebration, which literally doubled the size of my audience and gave me the ability to run community polls. So I asked if folks were/are afraid of clowns about 24 hours before this shoot and 48 hours before this video is available for you to watch. And based on the small self-selected sample, it seems that clowns do exist, but they're fine. And if you don't think so, you probably didn't click on this thumbnail. If you want to see the awful process of me getting into and then out of this makeup, that video's up on my Patreon page. Just saying. Even if you're terrified of clowns, though, this movie is unlikely to keep you up at night. There are still big, loud jumps here and there, but they're much less obnoxious this time around, and in most cases, the CGI things are even more goofy looking, with the naked old woman from the trailer in particular getting a good old guffaw out of me. There's the immediate, followed by something else entirely. And I don't think that's an accident, or that I was laughing at the movie. I really think that I was laughing with it, and that it is trying to be less scary and more fun. It Chapter 1 had basically a recurring gag, that Finn Wolfhard is a potty mouth, and it's funny enough, but it's also something that really doesn't work if older folks, and you don't cast Bill Hader to be a generic dumb comedy guy. He is much too talented for that. And indeed, the new Richie, a successful comedian who doesn't write his own material and also doesn't want to play Truth or Dare with an evil clown for again, less timely in 2019 than 1989 reasons, is the most complex and interesting character in the entire movie. Hader has been rightly praised for what he does here, but it's not just that he continues to have witty-ish retorts that adds levity to things. There are plenty of other bits, like the fact that older Bill the author is unable to write a satisfying ending. It's funny how the least interesting Bill in this movie is the only one who goes by that name in this movie. It Chapter 2 is at its best when it's focused on that stuff, on the camaraderie of the Losers Club as opposed to its trauma, which runs the gamut from generally affecting to genuinely abhorrent, like the fact that they turn to suicide into an act of heroism. And there are many good arguments to be made that suicide isn't cowardice and so shouldn't be depicted as such, but this particular twist on the source material justifies an "I died so that you may live" narrative, which is some hot garbage. This is a movie so stuffed and overstuffed with things and ideas that I find it hard to be mad. Instead, I'm just disappointed. And we all know that that's really worse than being mad, but to be disappointed in moments and aspects is not to be disappointed in the whole. And I'm not disappointed with It Chapter 2 in the entirety. I appreciate and respect the enormity of the task that the team had before them, of turning 1,100 pages into a sub-6-hour saga, and in the sequel case, of following up one of the most beloved big-budget horror movies in who knows how long, with a story that by its very nature had to be completely wild. This was a hard-as-heck thing they had to do. And though they didn't nail it, they gave me an unexpectedly fun 3 hours in the theater. 6.7 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hamry and Marco, Kat Saracata, and Benjamin Schiff. If you would like to see some behind the scenes of all this, it is available now on my Patreon for them and, maybe you. If you like the video, that's great. If not, I'm sorry, you definitely didn't make it this far. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week. I won't be wearing clown makeup, I promise.